Hi, it looks like we're live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Lori DeCare, and I am the founder of Vanishing Boise. Welcome. I am the host of this event, along with Brian Ertz, who is a local public interest attorney. And I'm going to start just by reading off some ground rules. So everybody just remember this is being live streamed on Facebook, so please be mindful of what you say. This recording in its entirety will live on Vanishing Boise's Facebook page forever. Please keep yourself muted when not speaking and keep background noise to a minimum. And I'm going to start just by introducing the topic. Tonight we're going to pull back the curtain on urban renewal and discuss both the legacy of urban renewal efforts from the past and its modern iteration as Capital Cities Development Corporation. We will discuss how they are different and how it also looks like history repeating itself. During the mid-20th century, urban renewal swept the US with promises of progress, revitalization, and revival, and a way to lure people back into the cities to counter suburban sprawl. The city created CCDC's predecessor, the Boise Redevelopment Agency, in 1965, amid President Lyndon Johnson's push for the Great Society. But the federal policy of urban renewal had devastating consequences. It sounded like a great idea at the time: give cities funding to clean up their impoverished areas and clear large tracts of urban land for new highways, parking, public facilities, or housing projects. But under urban renewal, cities demolished large swaths of areas it deemed blighted to redevelop the land to have supposedly higher quality buildings and neighborhoods. In many places, especially eastern and Midwestern cities, rapid change occurred that targeted fine-grained networks of sturdy, close-in mixed-use buildings, inner-city residential neighborhoods, and walkable streets, and replaced them with freeways, superblocks, parking lots, and mega structures like stadiums or convention centers. And of course, urban renewal and other municipal mega projects had a specific impact on low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. Planners at every level of government often targeted poor and minority communities, especially displacing Black neighborhoods, and used projects to reinforce lines of segregation. In 1963, noted Black author James Baldwin declared that urban renewal means Negro removal. The programs damaged the economic, social, and physical well-being of African Americans, displacing them of their homes and displacing them from their neighborhoods and dispossessing them of their homes. The effects we are still experiencing today, as seen by record low home ownership levels. Here in Boise, with a net loss of population and a downtown that was emptying out in favor of suburban sprawl to the east, an argument was made that downtown was blighted and needed to be revitalized. The Boise Redevelopment Agency then targeted a 9-block area and bulldozed a large swath of downtown, stripping away much of the downtown's history in a vain attempt to lure a regional shopping mall downtown. The mall never came to pass, but Boise's penchant for leveling its downtown became famous via a national Harper's Magazine article titled "Tearing Down Boise." The 1974 article lambasted Boise's urban renewal demolitions and famously termed it an exceedingly tidy bombing raid. Lost during that era was Boise's only Chinatown, and also Boise's only Black neighborhood, the River Street area. People evicted from their houses not only lose their home, but they also lose their jobs, their neighborhood, and their social ties. Urban renewal also serves as a pretext to open valuable land to speculation while driving low-income groups from city centers. Idaho's urban renewal law was established in 1965 to revitalize deteriorated and deteriorating areas, which were defined as a menace, injurious to the public, and resulted in things like disease and crime. Fast forward to the 1990s, and RDA disappeared and a retooled new urban renewal agency rose in its place, Capital Cities Development Corporation, or CCDC for short. CCDC's rather vague and sweeping mission of, quote, revitalizing Boise's downtown and its neighborhoods through urban design and development initiatives gives it broad powers. Today, Boise officials have lowered the bar to declare an area blighted to qualify for an urban renewal district. So even farm or pasture land without roads, a business with a missing shingle or two, or an area that has lower property valuations than other parts of Boise are cited as blight. In order to establish a district, CCDC merely produces a report explaining why it believes an area of the city is somehow depressed and is therefore in need of economic renewal, or that it is lacking in infrastructure. Once the report is written and rubber stamped by the city council, a new district is created. After the district is created, tax increment financing, or TIF, is the financing scheme used by Urban Renewal or CCDC that provides public subsidy to spur private development. And after this, we're going to watch an 8-minute video explaining TIF in more detail. As a result of TIF, some would say that the cost to other taxpayers who must backfill the substantial property tax sums diverted from our essential city services like schools, roads, and parks and police and fire is too high, and that a city experiencing explosive growth has no need nor business incentivizing developer profits. This current version of urban renewal has little to do with blight, and with an unelected board, it has a woeful lack of transparency, accountability, and community participation. It operates more like a shadow government with a slush fund for the city's favored developers. Another critique is that it is a publicly subsidized method of increasing private profits by removing risk, guaranteeing profits, and subsidizing well-connected speculators and real estate investors. Or as a planner once told me, taxpayers are providing streets paved of gold for the lucky private property owners in the urban renewal district. And bringing it back around to urban renewal's shameful demolition legacy, city planners once used urban renewal to disappear Boise's Black neighborhoods and redeveloped it into a large office buildings along the river with expanses of parking lots. Now with the proposed shoreline urban renewal district, the same area will once again be scrubbed of its marginalized populations via the array of homeless and shelter services that exist there for a fresh new round of developer profiteering. Indeed, history repeating itself. So now we're going to watch a short film about TIF. See if I can find it. Let's see, is that it? No, that's not it. I think I have to go here. Okay, can you see that, or is it, you can see this video? Okay.
I can't hear it.
Okay, hold on. I think I forgot to do one thing, so hold on. So there was no volume to it.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything at all. Not even a quiet sound.
Okay, let me try it again. I think I forgot to mark something. Let's see if it works this time.
Tax-increment financing is a tool used to fund urban renewal projects to attempt to increase the value of properties in a particular area.
How's it now?
It directly affects property taxes. Very few people understand what tax-increment financing is, and fewer still understand how it works. In our ongoing efforts to educate citizens about property taxes, the North Dakota Policy Council presents We will break the video down into 3 sections: urban renewal, tax increment financing, and how TIFs affect property taxes. To understand tax increment financing, you really should have a basic understanding of urban renewal law. In North Dakota, when a city finds that there are slum and blighted areas which they believe is a problem and injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and welfare of the community, the city can pass a resolution declaring such. After declaring a specific area blighted, the city creates what's called a workable program for utilizing public and private resources to develop commercial and industrial properties and eliminate blighted areas. The city adopts a resolution stating that the area in question consists of a slum or industrial or commercial property and designates the area as appropriate for a development or renewal project. After the resolution has been adopted, it must hold a public hearing to discuss the renewal plan. The city then must approve a renewal plan if it finds that a reasonable method exists to help families who have been displaced, the plan conforms to the plans of the city as a whole, and the plan provides for a maximum opportunity for development to be carried out by private enterprise. Urban renewal law gives vast powers to the city to carry out this plan. It can enter into contracts, arrange contracts, and execute contracts with any public or private entity to improve infrastructure, acquire property, borrow money, force the repair of private buildings, and others. To pay for the renewal plan, cities may issue bonds to be payable solely from the income derived from its connections with the plan. Keep in mind that these bonds do not count against any legal debt limitations. If it wishes, the city can give its urban renewal powers, minus a couple of them, to an urban renewal agency, which is its own corporate entity consisting of 5 unpaid members appointed by the mayor to 1-year terms. Once a renewal plan is in place, the city has the option of using tax increment financing to pay off any expenditures associated with carrying out the renewal plan, including paying off bonds and interest. Tax increment financing can also be used to assist developers develop commercial and industrial properties, as long as there is a public hearing. When the city decides to use tax increment financing, it requests the county auditor and treasurer to compute and certify the taxable value of each lot and parcel of real estate in the area, as last assessed and equalized before the date of the request. From then on, that value is frozen. The next time those properties are assessed, any increased value in those properties is considered incremental value. If there's incremental value, the property taxes paid on that incremental value do not go to the city, county, school district, and park board coffers. Rather, the tax increment property taxes paid go into a tax increment fund, or a TIF account. The TIF account is used to reimburse the expenditures used to carry out the renewal plan and redemption of premiums paid on bonds, notes, or other obligations. When the cost of renewal of the area has been fully paid, then any balance left over is proportionately given back to the other taxing entities, such as the city, county, school district, and park board. Tax increment financing was originally sold to governments around the country as a way to renew slum areas. As I mentioned before, it's part of urban renewal law in the North Dakota Century Code. However, since then, laws have been added to the Century Code that broaden the instances that government can use tax increment financing. Most governments that use tax increment financing now use it not to renew slum areas, but to boost property values in a TIF district. If a certain property has not gained value over the course of several years, the City Commission can hold a public hearing and approve a renewal plan for that property. Tax increment financing negatively affects everybody's property tax bill by taking the tax revenue from increased taxable valuations on the properties in the TIF areas and putting that into TIF accounts. Look at it this way. Let's compare two cities. For the sake of this video, we'll call them City A and City B. City A does not have a TIF area, and City B does. It just so happens that they both have budgets that are exactly $500,000. City A collects property taxes from all properties located in its corporate limits. The amount each property is taxed is proportionate to its assessed value. City B collects property taxes from all of its properties. However, the $50,000 share from properties located in the TIF area was put into a TIF account. This means that that particular $50,000 cannot be included in the city's general fund budget. So the rest of the property taxpayers will have to make up the difference. In other words, the general property taxpayers are subsidizing the development costs of the properties located in the TIF area. In this hypothetical scenario, property taxpayers in City B would have their property taxes 10% higher than they need to be. Counties, school districts, and park districts also lose out on this too. They're forced to keep everyone's property taxes high to subsidize the development of properties in the TIF area. This is a map of Bismarck's TIF area. Notice it encompasses most of what would be considered the downtown area. Why should all of the property taxes paid from property owners in this area be paid to the general fund, and only a portion of property taxes paid by property owners go to the general fund in this area? If tax increment financing and urban renewal projects are always taking place, then they must have a perceived benefit, right? Well, these projects are typically sold as a way to clean up blighted areas downtown, increase safety and walkability in urban areas. However, they can easily become slush funds used for political purposes. It's a good way for political leaders to funnel money to favored developers. That is especially true considering the mission creep I talked about earlier. A friend of the city might own property that's struggling. Through his friendships with the city commission, he can simply get the city commission to approve a TIF plan to get taxpayers to subsidize the redevelopment of his property. Similarly, politically favored developers may make it a common practice to seek these properties out and purchase them with the understanding that their buddies in city government will get taxpayers to subsidize the redevelopment of their purchased properties. The argument is often made that it's perfectly fine to take the tax increment money and set it aside in a special TIF fund, because without urban renewal plans and tax increment financing, the development would not have taken place and the increases in taxable valuation would not have occurred. If that's the case, then why shouldn't an entire city be made into a TIF area? Then everyone would be able to use their own property tax dollars to fund the remodeling of their house or fix their sidewalk. What's good for some should be good for the rest. We've taken a closer look at tax increment financing. While you're not quite an expert, you do know the basics. The next time your city attempts to renew its downtown area by using tax increment financing, you'll know that it just means higher property taxes. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website at www.policynd.org. For the North Dakota Policy Council, I'm Jacqueline Dotsenrod.
Okay, I think, are we back? Am I still sharing or do you guys see me?
You're sharing.
Okay.
There you
Welcome
go.
back. I'm having tech difficulties today, so thanks for bearing with me. Obviously that was a video about North Dakota, and so there were probably some slight differences in how their law is written than how ours is. I don't, if people have specific suggestions of differences that were mentioned in the video, feel free to jump in and point those out. But yeah, each state has its own enabling legislation, so there might be differences. And without further ado, I want to welcome our guest. Henry Wiebe is a Boise native, a Boise High and BSU graduate in business management. He's a real estate broker here in the community, and he calls himself a master generalist. He knows a little bit about a lot, and he's eager to challenge and question power and authority. He also was a CCDC employee, so he might provide some insights for us tonight in the discussion that we have about urban renewal. So I just want to start by maybe Brian, if you want to jump in and help frame things, or Henry, which either one of you guys. have ideas.
Sure, I can just say first, the video, apparently in the Dakotas, or at least one of them, they give the city the power. That's not the case in Idaho. In Idaho, there's an entirely different jurisdiction, the urban renewal jurisdictions. But in Boise and in Idaho, throughout Idaho, it is the mayor who appoints the board, the representatives who make the decisions about urban renewal districts and planning in that regard. So that's one of the significant differences. In terms of the, asking our guests questions, as an employee of CCDC, well, first, can you tell us when you were an employee of CCDC and what it is you were looking to accomplish through employment with CCDC?
Hey, Lori, I think your tech skills are just fantastic. So first, big shout out to you and your efforts. Good work. It's not easy. Great question. And thanks so much for including me in the discussion. And yeah, that's a great place to begin. I showed up at CCDC through some of the public meetings that they were having and talking about urban renewal. And I found it fascinating. I was super curious about it more than anything. I had gone to a couple of the meetings that they were holding, and I thought, this is really cool stuff. How does this all work? And I liked what they were saying. And so I went to Phil Cushlin, who was the director, and said, hey, you got any spots open? Maybe I want to work for you. How would this work? Maybe I could be of help. And so I worked in the planning department, and more than anything, just out of curiosity. And so a supportive role. And it seemed like a great vantage point to sort of see the inner workings, because it's working as this quasi-governmental entity. And so you get to sort of see the underbellies of how city works from one angle, and then how do they interface and relate to developers. And at that time, I wasn't planning on being involved in real estate per se, but it was obviously a great platform with which to become, well-versed in kind of how that works. Hope that answers the question. Curiosity, that was the bulk of it.
And when was that?
2000, 2001.
Okay.
Yeah, and so at the conclusion of it, I wasn't there quite a year, and I couldn't wait to get away from it. I realized that me working in a government kind of setting, not a great fit. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about urban renewal in Boise is that we've seen dramatic growth. And the authorizing statute talks about blight and necessary findings of fact that need to occur prior to the mechanism being available for redevelopment. And we don't see a whole lot of blighted areas. And in fact, we see plenty of investment from outside all over Boise. Was that the case in 2000, 2001 as well? Or what are your thoughts about the necessity of this mechanism given the already active market?
Well, you just aren't looking hard enough. If you need blight, you can find blight. One of the most interesting things that I witnessed while I was there was the effort to work on forming the East Gate district, which they struggled at the time to pull that off. And so the inner conversations within the office that I was a part of and witnessed were, how do we make this work, right? Because you're basically going to identify sagebrush and jackrabbits.
Are you talking about Gateway? Did they change the name to? Okay.
Yeah.
So Gateway is one of the newly established.
Correct. And at the time, they were trying to form that, and they paid an expert to come in and draw a boundary, and then write a report that looked nice to meet everybody's expectations. And it's like, this isn't going to pass a smell test, right? Like, you've got sagebrush and jackrabbits, and so we'll include that, but that's tough to talk about blight. And then you go, well, let's include the mobile home park, and then let's talk really, say, disparaging things about the open sewer lagoons, which was a complete and is a legitimate sewer practice to build an evaporative pond. And so, well, we'll include that, and then we'll write, some really horrible things about that neighborhood. But let's exclude, the little mall that's out there, and let's exclude Micron on the other side of the freeway. All these, just cut these things out. So Brent Coles was the mayor at the time, and then he got himself into a pickle, obviously with some of his misdeeds. But that was really wild to watch the inner office talk about how do we pull this off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and why are they doing acrobatics? Why would you say the municipal government and CCDC, or to the degree that it's an incestuous relationship, why would they be doing the acrobatics?
Well, because at the time there was a ton of warehousey kinds of stuff going in out in Meridian, and Boise felt like it was missing out. So it wanted to see some more warehousey kinds of stuff, right? Some freight supportive kind of things, which is what's happening out there now. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to go and grind in the services into basalt. Who wants to pay for that?
Right.
We couldn't very well have the city, be it the speculative developer, right, and grind in city services out there. And the developers out there are like, yeah, we don't really want to pay to put that stuff in. So, maybe CCDC will do it. And so that became the angle, right? We'll get it out there. We'll grind through the basalt. We'll figure out how to make it flow downhill, and we'll have the public pay for it, right, through the tax increment financing.
Well, and I want to point out for folks who might not be following, this is the Gateway Urban Renewal District. This is the property out on Eisenman Road, which is you're heading east towards Mountain Home. You can see is like right before you leave town, you'll see some warehouses to the right. And there's a huge mobile home park there called Blue Valley that people will remember was being threatened with a 100-bay trucking terminal, and the residents were engaged in a year-long fight to stop it and save their community from this environmental injustice, and which was basically orchestrated. And also in 2018, at the same time we were embroiled in this fight over saving Blue Valley, the city finally approved the Gateway Urban Renewal District. And if I remember correctly from being at City Hall during that, is they were using it as, they were justifying it by saying that it would provide family wage jobs. So it became a way to get, mid-income jobs on board. So that's how it finally passed, Henry. And for folks who are interested, I can do a quick screen share. I put together a small PowerPoint presentation, and in it is a list of all the current urban renewal districts. So let's go and take a look at that. So these are the ones that exist right now. Can you guys see that? So there are 5 that exist. 1 is expired. And then there are 2 that are currently proposed. The State Street corridor is actively being proposed. The bench one apparently is on hold. We don't heard anything about it for a while. But you can see from this chart that I put together this afternoon that there are over 5,300 acres if the other 2 get approved, that would then be in urban renewal districts. Which is about 10% of the entire acreage of the city of Boise. And then on the further column shows when they were declared an urban renewal district. And then moving on to the next slide, this is where they roughly are. So you can see for the first upper half of that, it's basically all of downtown, going all the way, you know, there's even on the shoreline, there's even some like Lusk area over by BSU. And then 30th Street goes along like 27th Street and I think what is now Whitewater Park, that's those little pieces jutting out. And then what we were just talking about, that Gateway East, and you can see on the map where it is located, you know, relative to Boise. And then the next one are the two proposed ones. So this is the new proposed bench urban renewal district. And if you remember, one of the main goals of it is to get rid of that tank farm right across from St. L's up there on like Curtis and Fairview, I think, or wait, no, it's Emerald and Curtis. And then all these kind of corridors, like, you know, road corridors are all sort of targeted. So Overland, Vista, Latah are all part of it. And then here is the proposed State Street urban renewal district. And you see it's like split screen. So the top is the west end of town, and that goes all the way to like, I think Old Horseshoe Bend Road. And then the east side, I think goes to, can't quite read that, but I think it's 27th Street. And it essentially is the entire corridor along State Street. And any place where you see it sort of juts out, you know, it generally means that some undeveloped land, pasture land, old farmland. And then two places in particular where you see it kind of really go out, there's mobile home parks that it's targeting. So there's one behind the Albertsons on Urey and State that has a little bump out. And then the one on the east side that bumps out a lot is the ITD campus, and all of that area back there kind of next to the Taco Bell. And I believe it goes all the way down. There's another really lovely little mobile home park there right across from the canal. If you go to that, you know, park and the pond by Esther Simplot Park, there's another little cute mobile home park there that's also been targeted with the urban renewal districts. And then this is the legislation in the Idaho Constitution that was passed in 1965 that actually enables urban renewal district here in Idaho. And then these are, this is a great list of things that are considered eligible expenses for urban renewal. So if you're a private developer and you own land in an urban renewal district, these are all the things that you can get help paying for. So I'm just gonna read that list. Sidewalks, street lights, furnishings like benches, bike racks, trash receptacles, streets, curb and gutter, street trees, irrigation, suspended paving systems, awnings, which I find particularly egregious because they're literally attached to people's buildings. And a few years ago, there was some controversy around it. And yeah, they're just basically giving away free awnings to anyone who asked. Who was in the urban renewal district. So if you noticed a couple years ago, lots of awnings went up downtown. Main utility lines, power, water, geothermal, sewer, phone, and fiber. And as Henry was saying, out in the Gateway Urban Renewal District, there's lava rock. And so to get into some sewer or utility lines, you have to bore down through this lava rock, which apparently costs a lot of money. And so by creating an urban renewal district there, basically the city is, you know, offering to use TIF funding to pay for it. Again, a public subsidy to private development. Historic building facade restoration, public plazas and or parks, and then public art. So those are the things that it pays for. And here's just like one.
It's missing one of great significance.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, it's parking.
Parking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the vehicle with which the city and CCDC has significant leverage to allow developers to go curb to curb and vertical.
Right.
They no longer have to worry about their parking because that gets subsidized.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, CCDC, I think, owns and operates some of the biggest parking garages downtown. So again, as Henry was saying.
Oh no, like all of them. Like
all of them. Okay.
Like
Oh,
they are the parking czar.
okay. And so besides TIF money, some smaller portion of the budget for CCDC comes from parking revenue.
Which
And-
is a losing, it's a money loser, right?
right.
Yeah, they don't make any money on it. They do collect money, but you know, the amount of money it costs to build them and the debt they service against the income they receive, it's a losing pursuit.
Right. And especially this last year during COVID, I believe they lost like millions of dollars from potential revenue from it. Okay, if you're ready, I'll go on to the next one. And this just shows kind of how they map out what the increment will be over time. So this is just one urban renewal district, the River Myrtle district. And you can see, I think the years are at the bottom. And you can see how the value of the increment goes up as time goes on. And that's that. And the last one, I didn't get to write it in, but the current budget for CCDC, I think, is $59 million. So some portion of that is, like I said, parking revenue, but the vast majority of it is TIF funds. And so you could almost say that that's all money, public money, property tax money that's diverted from the general fund, and that is used to subsidize developers. It's a substantial amount of money. Do we want to talk about that for a bit? Brian?
You want, well, absolutely. I mean, what's very fascinating to me is the authority that exists in Idaho for urban renewal and how it's been wholesale hijacked by private developers. And what I'm wondering, and perhaps our guest can enlighten me, is there's got to be some public interest. And I understand that the public interest in economic activity, there's that generally. But to what degree did planners assess whether or not this was going to help residents in the neighborhoods, affordability of housing, ease some of the excess injuries associated with the unbelievable development that's happening, environmental values, what public interest values were sought with these projects, or is it just a total grab bag for private developers, and the public interest is just sort of an afterthought that they have to paper over?
I want to start by saying, the people that are engaged with CCDC and that process and tax-increment financing and the whole animal of it, they're very well-meaning people. They really feel like what they're working on is a huge value add, and they're looking very long-term. And the education that they've received really supports the pursuit that they're on. And nobody can tell what the future brings, right? So they're using their best educated modeling to say, here's the direction we should go. And so, in each district, what are the goals to achieve? And they put a lot of energy into writing about it and, future casting what this should look like. And it's with the best interest of the entire community in mind. So then, I always come back to, well, if you're asking, if this is coming down the pike, who's invited it? Right? Are the people that are living here, did they invite this? And, I was quoted in the Statesman with something similar to this. And it was, who invited them? Who invited CCDC to come up on the bench where I live off of Vista and create a district? They have no one on record to have gone down to CCDC, not business owners, not individuals, and say, would you guys make a district here? We really feel like things could be better. And if that were the case, right, and you're getting invited in, then you go to work. But instead, that's not how it works, right? They come to the community after much thought and didn't include anybody from the community. Those that they attempted to include through some other pathways, which I could explain, there was no turnout. The public didn't want to participate in it. And so you could say, well, they don't understand, or it's not a problem for them. They don't see why we would do this. So as you bring it back, bring it full circle here, what's the community's engagement? What's the community get out of it? I guess you have to wait and see how that all turns out when they're done with the projects. Does everybody like downtown? Yeah, it's a pretty nice place, and it's clean streets and bricks and great facades, and the property values down there are great, and the core that's retired has got the makeup of the people who are living and working down there that they were looking for at the time of the creation, right? While I was there, I inventoried the outcome, and it's bankers, attorneys, all the supporting aspects that go into that, high dollar kind of atmosphere. Is there, affordable places to live in the core? No, that wasn't the pursuit either. They weren't trying to figure out, they might sprinkle in, some deals where affordable housing, could show up. So they eventually did fill in the hole with a building. That took quite a little while, and that had a lot of interesting stories and twists and turns.
Well, and you point to an important, I think you make an important point, or you point to an important phenomenon, which is the target demographics. So who's deciding, because this is a real issue. We all like, or lots of us like, yoga studios. We like microbreweries. We like, we don't like lawyers, but we like affluent young people, right? Or tech jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Or we think aspirationally we like those things. A lot of people like those things. But to what degree is that a bubble versus the actual, like, who's making the decision about what the demographic is supposed to be in the districts?
Yeah. You'd like to think the free marketplace was doing it, but if that were the case, wouldn't it do it on its own anyway?
Right. So there is there somebody, I mean, when we talk about desirables and desirable people moving in, because the impact of the brew pub, the yoga studio, the tech center is that people that have lived here for generations get priced out, right? And to what degree does that factor in the decision making when they talk about designating a district? I mean, I don't want to be too hostile, but we're in an affordable housing crisis, and we're seeing a mass exodus of Boiseans, and we're seeing a remarkable in-migration of a certain demographic. And is it the city government that makes that decision, or is it just assumed, or is it an assumption of the ideology or the schools that you're talking about? Because I couldn't agree with you more that I think everyone is well-intentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like plumbers, car mechanics, teachers. Go ahead. What? Baristas.
Yeah.
Others aren't the beneficiaries of these up values that are sought through this districting process. And I'm wondering whether or not there's a mechanism to make everyone beneficiaries, or if the assumption is just that when the property values go up, everyone enjoys. Well, everyone who owns property enjoys. Renters don't. But to what degree does that a conversation either within CCDC or in hearings that you've been a part of or
Yeah,
experienced?
my experience of it was there were steps and processes that were required, right, by statute, and a certain number of postcards need to be mailed, and invitations and awarenesses made, and ads posted, and we're on a schedule and a timeline to see these districts formed in a particular schedule. And as tight as we can make those, the better, because we got other ones to work on. And so when they would put presentation out for the public to look at and give feedback on, those, my experience was, those were just hurdles to get through. You know, certainly if someone came up with some great content, I don't think anybody would be opposed to using it. But as far as negative criticism, you know, those weren't really listened to. Those were just complainers. And, you know, we saw that as they opened up with the bench district pursuit, right? And, you know, they say in their paperwork that they reached out to the community leaders, right? The neighborhood associations. I was the president for the Vista Neighborhood Association at the time. They didn't come talk to us about what the district might look like. They didn't say, we were thinking about drawing the line here and not here, and here's why. And I asked them, I said, well, how did you come up with the map? Well, the city planners did that. No, you didn't talk to anyone about it? You didn't, who else did you talk with that you ought to draw the boundary here, but not here? I mean, it seems like you'd get some feedback on that before you just run down the road with here it is. But that's not how that works. So to circle back to your point of, you know, how much involvement is there with the community? And if they really cared about doing the bulleted list of the things, right? Because those things could get paid for by the city anyway. If we need new sidewalks and gutters, that can be coordinated with the city and ACHD. Those improvements can be made. But when they're drawing boundary around things, that's a sales pitch. I'm in real estate, right? I can take what CCDC maps or the Urban Land Institute, which did a similar kind of activity, and I can take those documents and I can go down to Vegas and put on my fancy shoes and my sunglasses and go find the financiers down there and tell them, I can pull together this pool of properties. I'm going to go knock door to door and I'm going to pull all these together. And in 10 years, your property is going to be worth X dollars because CCDC is going to make this a redevelopment district. We'll bulldoze all these houses. Zoning will be changed. We'll go curb to curb and vertical because they're planning on putting a parking garage across the street. And so I'm on the back end of trying to hustle a huge program. That's a sales pitch they're doing. And there are people out there that recognize this in hot cities like in Boise. And so when these districts get formed, I mean, watch out, because these land deals are going to start going on in the background. And I saw that at CCDC, the different characters that would come and go out of the office to meet with Phil Cushlan and the varying directors. And, you know, those aren't on public record. You don't know who's having these meetings and what is being promised or hustled. And again, you know, I mean, I was just a fly on the wall. So, and that was 20 years ago, but why would it be any different today?
Very good point. And it's funny that you would mention Vegas because there is a proposed development along the river in Garden City. I know we're talking about a different city now. And there is an urban renewal district there, but I'm not 100% sure it's in this area. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But there is a huge new development going in there, like on 40th and by Adams along the river. And it is a huge hotel and luxury apartments. And The developer is from Vegas. And a mobile home park was in that area, like I think a 15-unit mobile home park that was, everyone was evicted. And then there were several other kind of small cottages that were evicted. So it's very similar to what you're just explaining, how these processes work. Now, I don't know that this came from someone from CCDC or a real estate investor going down to Vegas to solicit people, but it is definitely something that could happen. Someone asked in the chat, when you mention mobile home parks in urban renewal districts, are they attempting to get rid of them or improve them? Does anyone want to take that?
Yeah, that would be to remove them. They're a little money machine for whoever owns them. Most of them, they own, the property, and then the people that are there, rent the land, right? They may own the mobile home that's on it, and then they'll rent the land, or they may rent the mobile and the land too. But basically, the investment that the person has there is really low, and they get a huge return. So you've got to put a pretty sweet price in front of them to have them let go of that little money machine. And so, yeah, it's low income housing, and it does create affordability, but then you also have like a slum relationship, right, with the owner, where the owner is making so much money on them, he could improve them and make them nicer. But then of course he's going to have to spend some money to do that. And we see that all over on the bench. And what's interesting is to watch, CCDC not draw a boundary around one and maybe a boundary around another. Is like, did they go have a conversation with the property owner? I don't know. They won't tell you, right? When I sat with him, I said, well, you've included the school off of Vista there, but next to the school is this mobile home park with another vacant lot owned by this mobile home owner, right? Why didn't you include that? It's clearly blighted. I mean, it's not being taken care of. And so, they have no answer to that. Why didn't you include that? And they're like, whoa, oh, that's a really great point, Mr. Wiebe. Thank you so much for pointing that out. We'll take a deeper look at that. It's like, well, how did you come up with your map to begin with? I mean, like, it's just, it's buffoonery, and what it's really is, it's deceptive, because there are strong reasons why they did or didn't do it.
It's just not in the public realm. Yeah. So I want to circle back to something we said earlier. And so I want to just make the point about kind of the folly of urban planning. So if we think like historically, we created, we were demolitioning the hearts of cities in the past, right? These historic buildings that, of course, many cities regret that they just bulldozed entire, historic blocks. Many places did this to put a freeway through the middle of a city, which seems like a really bad idea now. And we did it to facilitate more auto-centric development, building parking lots, parking garages, things like that. And so we think to ourselves, well, we would never make those mistakes now. But then the question is, are we? Like, has urban planning really improved that much? Are we just always confident in what we're doing, that we're doing the right thing, right? So originally, a few years ago, Boise started subsidizing Wall Street apartments downtown, right? And now there's just like a building boom of apartments. So apartments are like wealth extraction machines, because oftentimes they're owned by out-of-state investors or investor groups. Many times, Wall Street level, private equity, global capital, etc. And you can't convert apartments to condominiums, so there's no chance for people to ever get home ownership. So we have just all these apartments that we're building. Now, are we going to regret that in the future, right? Is that going to be a problem for the longevity or the home ownership? And, a lot of these apartments are being slapped up quickly, so they only probably have 20 or 30-year lifespans, and so they're going to be blighted in a few years, right?
Well, and
think-
what's really fascinating to me, what's fascinating to me is that you've got this urban renewal authority, which has the TIF mechanism. And that's a unique mechanism at Idaho state law, and Idaho being a Dillon's rule law, where the authority needs to be expressed for the city to do it or for any jurisdiction to do it. This is a real opportunity that the state legislature has bestowed upon these renewal districts. And so the mayor has a great deal of power politically, because it's those appointees on the CCDC or in whichever municipality you're in Idaho who set the tone and who establish those priorities as they relate to community involvement and the degree and measure and whether or not it's meaningful solicitation of community involvement, or whether or not it's just Beater's favorite developers, right? And so, and that's what's happening now. And so, we've seen some, I understand there's some politics going on at CCDC right now, given the new mayor, struggling with some of the, previous appointees, but this is a unique opportunity, because these contracts and these subsidies can come with conditions. If CCDC is going to pay for these things and pay for these redevelopments, it has a unique express authority to incorporate the needs of blue collar Boiseans and everyday, teachers, everybody, so that everybody enjoys it. This is where it happens. And we see the city government all too often, their favorite retort is, we're a Dillon rule state. It's been preempted by the Idaho legislature. We can't require X or Y or Z for affordability. But the Urban Renewal Authority has a remarkable opportunity to do exactly those things through the private contracts that exist with the developers that are being subsidized. And it's disappointing to me to hear, as well intentioned as everybody might be, there's the same thing is with the planning department of the city of Boise. There's a worldview, there's an ideology, and it's impervious to many arguments or many wants. And it's so satisfied to say we just can't do that because the Idaho legislature preempts us. There's got to be a diversity of thought that exists, and that's injected into these things, because right now, when you look at the map, it looks like displacement. It looks like they're just selling off areas of town to favored developers, and that everybody who's there be damned, everybody else. I don't know if there are any thoughts about that, or that's, but
that's a good point. And Henry mentioned this earlier too. So let's try to link this back to the zoning code rewrite that's going on. And so, in the housing bonus ordinance that was passed. And so these are also basically gifts to developers, right? So it allows them to build, to change the zoning in an area. So there are certain neighborhoods, like especially along State Street, maybe along the bench, that were basically in the west side, that are, single family neighborhoods. And so if you're changing the zoning to now allow, like, duplexes and quadplexes and sixplexes, and you're putting apartment buildings and condominium buildings, you basically sweeten the deal for developers. They're going to buy single family houses, demolition them, build a much more lucrative product on that land. And part of it is like lessening the parking requirements, allowing lower setbacks. And these are all things that basically create more profits for developers. And so these things go hand in hand. And as well as like, as we're talking and the process goes on about creating urban renewal districts, most of the general public has no idea what you're talking about. Like, I learned about urban renewal districts a few years ago, and as I talk about them, people just like have glassy-eyed looks at me. They don't know what I'm talking about. And I explain it, even when you explain TIF, which we had to watch a 9-minute video to fully understand it, it's very confusing, unless you're like an economist. And so people don't know about it, and they certainly don't know how it affects our community, and they certainly don't understand the threat to like a regular Boisean, but the developers sure know, right? And so they're totally tuned into the process, and they're going ahead of the urban renewal district getting declared, buying up property, speculating, right? And so for the State Street Urban Renewal District, there's a lot of very low income neighborhoods along there. The goal of the city, the goal of CCDC, is to increase the property tax revenue from that area, the property valuations. And so there are people just sitting there living their lives. They have no idea that their neighborhood is about to be targeted. I mean, it is being targeted right now because, like I said, developers are already speculating. And so they're just going about their life, living on a fixed income, working a low wage job. They bought their house, they're a renter, so they're totally gonna be displaced. But even like a homeowner, a low income homeowner, their property taxes will increase. That's the whole goal. And they'll be displaced as well. And they won't even know that the city started this process, in 2018 that led ultimately to their displacement, right? And this is like happening all over the city, like people are being displaced like right and left. And we look at it like as some personal failure on the part of whoever it is that's being displaced. Like, I didn't do something right. Like, I should have bought a house. I should have gone to school. Like, I should have had a side hustle, whatever it might be. But we're all just like victims of this process that many people don't even know. And, and it's so inequitable, right? Like, the developers are they're basically extracting all this wealth. I like to say they're like strip mining our neighborhoods essentially, right? Because they're well aware of this process is going on, and they're getting in there early, buying up the property. And then when the zoning is changed and, also the housing bonus, they're all ready to strike, and make the big bucks. And we're all just sitting here just shell shocked. We had no idea that this all was happening.
Can you see this picture?
Yeah, I'm not sure who that is, but I see it.
That's a Native American named Jackson Sundown.
Okay.
And that guy was a young boy when his tribe had to flee to Canada, right? During the Indian Wars. So he was hanging out in his moccasins, or whatever the story kind of looked like, right? It was hunky-dory with grandma and rolling their thing. And the white people came in and just completely turned everything upside down. And it was mayhem. And so as a young boy, he witnesses all this carnage and runs away with his tribe, and then comes back down to Oregon and gets involved in the rodeo because he's good with horses, right? The guy ends up being a rock star in the rodeo. And I'm telling this story because the magnitude of change that man experienced is quite overwhelming. He went from bareback riding, with his family and enjoying all those things, and then being 50 years old and riding in a Cadillac. And I bring this up because change is inevitable, right? And the mechanisms with which our country operates and the way that humanity relates to each other is at the center of this, right? And so our money system and all of these things and the way we treat each other is at the center of this. So we can bitch and moan and complain, or we're gonna have to figure out how to dance and move. Otherwise, we just suffer, right? And so waging war against a machine like this, pretty overwhelming, like what's to be done about it, I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about. That's why this group's formed. That's why people are online here, becoming educated, and then what's to be done about it. And I don't think that there's anything to, I'm not going to be able to go down to CCDC and tell them how to be different, right? Every day in all of our choices and how we treat each other and how we treat this planet, how we treat our kids, how we treat our neighbors, all of that to me is at the center of it. And the amount of change that's probably ahead of us, man, can you imagine seeing the kind of change that guy did? I mean, it's my little podium pitch out of it, like, because that's ultimately it. What are we going to do about it?
Right.
Become educated, and then what?
Yeah, let's definitely talk about that.
Well,
so
the mechanism in Idaho is the mayor
Mhm.
with the appointees on CCDC, and ensuring that those appointees are the right people that have the right ideas. Because what we've been talking about, when I talk about ideology and worldview, which is at the planning department in Boise and at CCDC, I assume it's one and the same in terms of the ideology, or just the assumptions that they go into, which is it's upvalue. I was talking about before. They want more people. It's not necessarily that they want you and I to make more money. It's that they want they want to encourage people that make money to move here, and the plumber and the teacher can get pushed further and further out into the suburbs, or people need to participate in these public hearings and raise hell about how is everyone going to enjoy the uplift, rather than it being uniquely and particularly captured by a few who understand the language or have the capital to get in the game before. Because that's really what it is it's knowing where the urban renewal district is going to be designated and having enough capital to buy land within those weird gerrymander-like lines that you see on the maps when they're designating the urban renewal, because it's a pretty safe, pretty good investment if you have enough money to get there before those lines are drawn that way.
Right. So I just want to remind everybody there's about 20 minutes left. And so please ask questions, raise your hand, or just start speaking, ask in chat. I just want to encourage people to ask questions. I've got one here in front of me that I'm going to start with, and then hopefully that'll encourage other people to do it. Talk to us a little more about the incestuous relationship between city government, CCDC, county government, etc. And is there a revolving door, employment door between CCDC and the development community? Feel free to name names.
Well, how about the board? I mean, why is Beater still on it?
Right.
Or isn't Holly's husband on there?
Yeah, one of the city council members' husbands is also on the CCDC board.
Yeah.
It's not okay. And you don't need to say it, but it's not okay. It's corrupt. That's what corruption is. These are lucrative positions. They're making money. That's how certain people know before the map is drawn where the map is going to be drawn. And
come on, but they're unpaid. They're unpaid. It's a total volunteer. It's a goodness of their heart,
The goodness of their heart for the betterment of the community.
Well, and we always want to mention the fact that Derek O'Neill, who is a developer himself and was the city's planning director for I don't know, at least 5 or 6 years during Beater. In 2018, tendered his resignation, and then immediately went working for the investor group that is headed up by the Agra Beef owner, Rebholes, and is basically heading up Shoreline Urban Renewal District that he very likely was involved in its creation. And for folks in the Veterans Park Neighborhood Association, you know, there's definitely a line between that urban renewal district and the shelter, the interfaith sanctuary shelter, moving from that particular district. That is a very lucrative land there in that area now. And so there are grand plans to redevelop it. And there literally are plans that they're working on right now to create, open up all that area for, demolition and new construction. And so that's the biggest revolving door I can think of. So I'm naming names and I just did it. So.
Well, and that's the frustration it's at the city is if you work for the city, you work for government, typically you have a job. If the city job or the government job goes away, where are you going to get the job? And so that informs performance when you're working for the city, you see, because if you piss off prospective employees when you're a regulator, you might not as easily get a job in the cush private sector if you ever decide, or if the city ever decides, or more likely if you ever decide that government work is no longer your forte. And so, but there's a battle at CCDC. That's also apparently when we talk about, council members' husbands being on CCDC. It's interesting to speculate, or at least to pontificate about it. That's a pretty significant whip the mayor has with council, right? And how that affects, it's a whip and a carrot when it comes to maintaining a majority and maintaining political influence in the Boise City Council, because the mayor decides who's on CCDC. And if the councilors, the city council members, they exercise authority with respect to the city and checks and balances and all that. But if you give them a sweet job at CCDC, then you've got a friend forever on council, and you don't need to worry about that seat when it comes to any number of decisions that the city makes, any number, both in the mayor's office and in terms of influencing council decisions. So we've got a real problem. And it's unconscionable and unbelievable to me that the media fails to bring this up, this incestuous relationship with CCDC and the city, and how coincidentally all these relationships exist. When it's clear, it's corruption from my perspective, or in my opinion.
Richard, did you have a
Richard?
question?
Yeah, I just caught up the last of this discussion. Great, thanks for having it, and great to have old representative talking about this. Karen Danley, when she's running for city council, also made a map of where all of the current CCDC board members lived, and just like city council, it was extremely, maybe not quite as clustered as city council, but you can't really get more than that. It's hard to. There was 6 out of 7 and the mayor are within 1.5 miles of each other. for an 80 square mile city. But it was similar with CCDC. They don't represent the entire city by any means. Again, they tend to represent those politically powerful areas. And that's a problem, especially when they're talking about expanding, all the way out to Eagle on State Street and all through, especially, the bench, heavily into the bench. How many people actually live in those areas that they're going to be expanding into or nearby, so just another aspect of that.
Yeah,
I
great
think
point.
that there's a lot of, we talk about corruption, right? Corruption operates too in retaliation. So if you're not in lockstep with the vision that's being presented, and you question it, and you want answers, you're a problem. You're in the way, and you're causing grief, and there's retribution for that. They will not play nice if you decide as a neighborhood, right, that you'd like something to happen. They won't help, and that's corruption, right? Just because you question their authority, just because you doubt their pursuit and you want answers, that doesn't mean that they should have the right to reject or not follow through with the agreements that they've already made, right? Those neighborhood plans that neighbors put their energy into, to disregard those plans, right? CCDC drawing a district down the Vista corridor and not referencing the Vista neighborhood plan, even though it's at a point of expiration, right? There's no reference to it whatsoever. What was the point of it? I mean, there's a breach there in obligation that you commissioned the public to be involved in, and then you disregard it. You just don't even go to it. It's not important. You didn't even know where it came from. It's
outrageous. It's outrageous.
It's absolutely outrageous. And if you bring it up, you're a problem. Mm-hmm. And I could go on, right? It's infuriating. It's to the extent that what's the point? There's no point in neighbors getting together and work on these things on their own time and dime, because they don't have the stamina or the stay power to see any of it through.
Bingo. Yes. Thank you for that. Good point. So we've got a little less than 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure folks have questions, that they get their questions in. So does anyone else have questions? Someone said dual relationships, conflicts of interest, incest. There is no excuse for this behavior with the size of the population in Boise and the Treasure Valley. Okay. People don't have questions. Does anyone have a statement?
There needs to be, and I've been talking about this, but at the state level, there needs to be a way to elect the board members on these urban renewal, because it's too much power for a mayor to have, and those shenanigans and those sweet those sweet favors. And then, yeah, how Beater's still on the, I mean, it's just so overtly, they need to be subject. I mean, the power that they have is such that they should be subject to election.
Yeah.
Maybe like judges, they're appointed and then retained or something, or even the mayor can appoint them, but they're subject to lower thresholds for removal through a vote, recall election or something, because there needs to be a way to influence them. They're too insulated through the mayor right now from public accountability. And
one difference between the video that we watched and the policy here is, I think that she mentioned they had 1-year terms. I think here in Boise, they're 4-year terms. So once they're in office for a very long time. Okay, a couple questions in the chat. Brian mentioned a way that urban renewal districts can support affordable housing. What would that mechanism be? And I guess you said something about leverage to support affordable housing.
Yeah, so there are multiple, but basically when the private developers are being subsidized, they're subject to contracts. And those contracts are going to have terms. And that's where you begin exacting meaningful mitigation, let's call it, on gentrification. Because the whole point of these urban renewal districts is to stoke property values, right? And property taxes. And like, we can agree again, but let's just, powers that be tend to unanimously believe that that's a good idea. And the question becomes, who suffers for that? People that can't afford to pay the higher property taxes, and renters. And so provisions in those contracts with developers that say, if you want this subsidy or these different subsidies, and if you're going to be involved in here and with these development agreements, you know, you're going to participate in X number of affordable units, or we'd like to see X number of affordable units here. The same is true with the TIF financing as it relates to potential interest in utilizing existing mechanisms for land trusts, urban land trusts, and community land trusts, such that the trusts take certain ownership equity and encumber property in ways that collectively can have a positive impact on affordability, so that we, with Vancouver, who talked about how Cambridge has utilized, or not Cambridge, but a number of communities have utilized these public, or these urban land trusts. And Idaho has, and Boise has these urban land trusts. And so creating partnerships with CCDC and the city of Boise to enhance those mechanisms aggressively, that'd be one way of financing or capitalizing those mechanisms in a way that aren't happening right now. And so,
yeah, but the counter to that, Brian, though, is that the whole tax increment financing and the increased property values don't go hand in hand with poor people. They don't go together.
no, I agree.
You're not going to pump property value. So it's like it's oil and water. They don't go together. You can't support housing for poor people and have property values go up.
Well, you can.
It's a totally rocky road, because otherwise the other subsidy would be if we did like the parking garages, right? But parking helps increase property values, right? So we'll subsidize that. But if we were to treat the parking garage as like a housing unit, and you then had more poor people living in the atmosphere, right, with which you're trying to get property values to go up, it doesn't work.
But the property taxes are assessed on the ownership interest that you have. So when the land trust takes ownership interest, right, there's housing, but the owner isn't paying for the speculative value of the encumbrance. And that's how they mitigate the property tax issue that you're talking about, in terms of, and so because the owner of the encumbrance, or the owner, is the trust in a nonprofit capacity. And we won't go into the city, but so there are mechanisms of creating affordable housing that mitigate the disproportionate allocation of benefits versus injuries. And what your point the point that you're making is really fascinating, because that's the issue is we're pouring kerosene on a bonfire, already a bonfire, right, with this market in Boise. And the question is do we have the political will and leadership of somebody to say, you know what, look, I agree with you. But that's what I'm saying is like we can encourage and tickle growth in these areas and encourage communities in these positive ways and temper it from kerosene on a bonfire. There's going to be appreciation. There's no way of avoiding it right now. That's what the market is saying. Without the renewal districts, there's going to be appreciation, right? And so, and these are factual findings. So we'll do some still a little more flavor that we can capture with TIF, right? But direct those benefits in ways that mitigate the demographics. Those of us in the city of Boise who are suffering the most from this narrow or this marginal, these people that are gaining everything.
You just got muffled, Brian. I don't know what happened there.
I apologize. There's got to be a way of better distributing the benefits and mitigating the damages of what's happening, because the gentrification is so fast and you're adding kerosene to it with this mechanism. And so there has to be and that's what I mean by it is a nuanced sort of a insider baseball conversation to have when we talk about growth in Boise, right? And that's too bad. And perhaps it's by design. I don't know. I get cynical in that way. But there has to be a way to pressure the mayor and to pressure the CCDC to begin making damn sure that all of us enjoy the uplift and that damage is mitigated when it comes to those most vulnerable and those who can least afford to be the ones to sustain the damages. I mean, what's happening in Boise right now is outrageous all over the place. The affordable crisis, people are they're getting squeezed. And this kerosene that the Urban Renewal Authority has been currently, the way that it's been utilized, it isn't helping. It's exacerbating the problem.
Right on.
So
there's a couple of questions left. We're a minute over, so I'm gonna try to hit a couple more questions before we close this up. So I know Richard's got a question, and if anyone else does, I see a couple in the chat, and I'll try to get to those.
Thanks. Just I was curious if you've put up the maps of any of these new proposed urban renewal districts, and for instance, that's a yes. And did you bring up the, for instance, the Glenbrier manufactured home community behind Albertsons near my neighborhood? You did?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, we did talk about that.
Good. Thank you. Because, case in point, I mean, a successful community that's been around, full of energetic, intelligent, active, elderly women. And that's a group that is not going to go quietly into the dark night. Their lives, they know their lives are kind of hanging on this thread. I mean, what's going to happen to them if they get displaced, if that gets sold as a TIF would obviously that's a prime target for urban renewal, right? Buy low, sell high. Anyhow, thanks. I'm glad you have that.
I have a question here. How do we make this an issue in the 2021 Boise City Council elections? Election years are good times to put elected officials appointedly on the spot. Does anyone want to grab that one?
we need to cultivate candidates that will bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start calling out the media for its failure to ask the tough questions. I mean, our local media is a problem. It's a superficial coverage. They're not filling in the blanks. And so get candidates that will bring up these issues in ways that are accessible to people.
Yeah.
So we need to cultivate candidates. We need to ask good people to start running.
Yes, definitely. Katie asked, she said she's been asking in mayor listening sessions about the impact to schools and or fire police operational funding. And I'm generally waved off by saying that those funding sources aren't impacted by the urban renewal tax increment being redirected. Is that true, or do you have a response? I'm wondering if Erica wants to take that one.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The school issue, I want to say it was several years ago, the Boise School District almost took the city to court, or CCDC to court, because of the skimming away of that money. And so they worked things out, and now for schools, when an urban renewal district has a school in it, they basically make it so that the TIF money can go back to improvements that benefit the school. Otherwise, they were all going to end up in court on that. In terms of how the TIF money takes away from the operational side, yeah, I mean, you're not getting as much money in the city's operating budget, general tax revenue. So it's going to hurt it no matter what. You have 20 years, and the part that the city doesn't address, most of this urban renewal then causes increased density. That's more people needing services, more calls, more demand. And so to act like, oh, it doesn't matter, it does. You've got more demand on the system without additional money to accommodate that demand. So it does make a difference, but they just don't want to address it.
Great point, Erica. You did a great job explaining that. And yes, the school district has a separate agreement now with CCDC about that. And, thanks for pointing that out.
Does another question that came in, does anyone know why the Bench Urban Renewal District is on hold? I'm not sure anyone would be privy to that information at this point in time. So Henry, maybe in your capacity with the Vista Neighborhood Association.
Yeah, there's no earthly way of knowing. Yeah, they were hellfire. We're going to get this done. It's going to be in 18 months. We're going to make this happen. It's going to happen really quick, but we're going to be sure to involve everyone. And then poof, something turned it all off, and they all went back into their little holes, and only to resurface at some point in the future. Wait to see. I'm sure there are a lot of deals being done in the background, right? I mean, people are busy trying to figure out who's going to let go of which property for how much money, and you know, what kind of deals can happen. And the gross part about that, right? The statute says that they are not allowed, CCDC is not allowed to talk about Fight Club, right? They can't go pool up with people and talk about Fight Club. And yet they're doing it, but then not saying they're doing it. And then if you want to know who they're doing it with, then you're not in Fight Club. So yeah. I
remember during that time that they were actively talking about the Bench Urban Renewal District, there was this slick video that who's the gardener guy? Oh, Tommy Alquist did. And he was like standing next to the tank farm, basically trying to solicit investors to go in with him on, I don't know, redeveloping that property. So perhaps they made the pitch and not enough investors came forward. And so now it's being put on a shelf for a while.
Lori, remember the other part of that we were looking at was some of that crosses into that opportunity zone. And
right.
Our federal government hadn't quite worked out all the nifty little creative ways to make that work. And so investors were holding back because they didn't want to take that risk. So my guess is that those things are being worked out, and we'll see it come roaring up again.
Do you have a quick explanation of what opportunity zones are for people who might not be familiar?
It's a clever sort of way to take your investments, and instead of paying capital gains, you can reinvest them into the opportunity zone and feel all good about yourself. And the longer you leave it in there, then you never have to pay tax on it. And then you do get to withdraw it tax-free. So it's for the 1%.
It's kind of like a federal urban renewal district, right? Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, that would probably be a good way to put it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, that'd probably be a good way. And you could do it anywhere, any opportunity zone, all over the whole country. Boise has the tank farm and then a piece that's kind of just west of St. L's up there. Those are our two designated opportunity zones in Boise.
Okay, I'm going to do one last call for questions. And unless we have one, I think we're going to wrap it up. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I think it was very instructive. I think it's important to talk about urban renewal and TIF because most people don't understand it. So hopefully we can keep circulating this video around and have further discussions about it. Thanks, Henry, for joining us. Brian for being here as usual. And we've kind of scaled back to having these live streams every 2 weeks, but now I'm just wondering if we should do a couple more and then maybe put it on hold for the summer. So I'm probably going to send out or like put on Vanishing Boise like a poll about what people want to do. If they want to keep doing one, maybe we can do one more and then put it on hold for the summer. We can talk about it, what people feel like makes sense. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care of
Thanks,
yourself.
Henry.
Bye.